Hello children. In today's activities we'll be using what we already know about the clock to reason out some situations. But before we start, let's just remember what the clock hands show. The short hand points at the hour, so we also refer to it as the hour hand, whereas the long hand points at the minutes, and so we call it the minute hand. And we must also keep in mind that whenever a new hour is starting, the minute hand must be pointing at the 12, and we say that the hour is o'clock. So let us start with this first task. Take a look at this clock, and the time it's showing. Our friend is telling us that the time is 3 o'clock. I wonder if he's right. So, children, keeping in mind what we just said and what we know about the clock, I want you to pause the video and spot the mistake. We'll discuss it as soon as you're done. Right, I think that I realized what's wrong here. Our friend is telling us that the time is 3 o'clock. However, we know that whenever it is o'clock, the minute hand, which is the long hand, should be pointing at the 12. And the hour hand, which we know is the short hand, should be pointing at the hour. Now here we can see that the minute hand is pointing at the 3, whereas the hour hand is pointing at the 12. It's as if the hands have swapped round the numbers they are pointing at. So, in order for the time to be 3 o'clock, the minute hand must be pointing at the 12, and the hour hand must be pointing at the 3. So here we're seeing that the hands are not showing us 3 o'clock. Let's move on to the next slide. Here we are once again going to see clocks. Now Nina is telling us that if it is 12 o'clock, both hands will be pointing at the 12. And her friend Tim is telling us that if it is 11 o'clock, both hands must be pointing at 11. Is it so? Think a little bit and try to decide who's right. So, if on the first clock we had to read 12 o'clock, the minute hand needs to be pointing at the 12, and it is. And the hour hand would need to be pointing at the 12 as well, and it is. So, yes, it is 12 o'clock, and Nina is right here. Now if we look at the second clock, Tim has taken what Nina said and applied it to his clock, but we know that when reading the time to the hour, the minute hand should be pointing at the 12, and here it's not. So, he is wrong. His clock does not show 11 o'clock. Now children, let's move on to the next activity, where we are going to practice reading the hour. Here we have 4 clocks, and next to each clock you can see 2 different times. Just by looking at these clocks, we can notice that the minute hand on each one of them is pointing at the 12. So they are all showing us the time to the hour. And the task you have to do here is to measure the correct time with the clock face. So pause the video and work them out. And when you're done, come back and we'll check the answers together. Right. Let's see them together. The first clock here is showing us 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. It is 4 o'clock. Right. Moving on here. This clock is showing us 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. It's showing 8 o'clock. Right. Over here we can see that the hands are in a perfectly straight line, with the minute hand pointing up to the 12 and the hour hand pointing down to the 6, so it is 6 o'clock. Perfect. And the last clock over here is showing us 11 o'clock. Right. Now, let's move on to the next task. So, let's see what this activity is all about. Here we're seeing 2 clocks, and we must spot the difference between them and see which one shows 3 o'clock. So, pause the video until you think it's true. Right. Let's observe the clock hands first. I notice that on both clocks the numbers being pointed at are the 3 and the 12, as you can see. Okay? Now on the first clock, we see that the minute hand is pointing at the 12 and the hour hand is pointing at the 3. On the second clock, the minute hand is pointing at the 3, whereas the hour hand is pointing at the 12. So which of these clocks reads 3 o'clock? The first clock, right? Because we know that when the time is o'clock, the long hand must always point at the 12, whereas the short hand would point at the hour. Okay, there it goes. So, with this in mind, let us finish today's session with this last task. We read that the time is 7 o'clock. But does the clock show us 7 o'clock? What's wrong here? Just as we have seen in the last activity, the hands are not placed correctly. The minute hand, which is the blue hand, should be pointing at the 12, and the hour hand, which is red, should be pointing at the 7. So, children, remember that when the minute hand is pointing at the 12 and the hour hand is pointing at any number on the clock face, it means that a new hour is starting, and we call that o'clock. Until next time, goodbye.